A man without the knowledge of his roots, he can't determine his destiny. Marcus Garvey said that a man without the knowledge of his roots was like the man without the knowledge of his history was like a tree with no roots. And he just can't grow. And he easily topples over because he don't have no roots. I'll start this story out like this. My dad's family was from Nuala, Oklahoma, which is a little bit down the road. And his family, they were farmers. They raised cattle. So after the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, they opened up the plantations and told all the black people they was free. Except in Oklahoma, they said, that's why we have Juneteenth, I think, because they waited a while. They kept us, the ones in Oklahoma, slaves for another few months. My grandpa left Paris, Texas, headed for the land run of 1889, and his wagon wheel broke down approximately I-35 where Robinson is. Back then it was just a dirt road, but that was the area, and the wheel broke, and they didn't have a spare wheel, so they ended up missing the runs. They all camped out on the side of the road, and Norman wasn't a town yet. I think it was the absentee Shawnee people took a rope and put it around the wagon where the broke wheel was, and with their horses they drug the wagon to a spot in Nuala, Oklahoma, which is not far from here, and told them that they could exist on that little portion of land. So the Indians gave them their first head start with some land. And from that, Grandpa married my grandma, and they began the Lambeth legacy. My grandpa had 21 kids in his family. Not by the same wife. What happened was he married, when he first got married, I think they had probably 7 kids together, and she might have had 2 already. And then she passed. And after that, he married her sister. And then she already had 2 kids, but her husband had passed. And so when they got together and had kids, the number came up to 21. And so my daddy would always say, Grandpa, the boys was like gold, because he could go to the bank and get a loan just because he had probably 13, 14 sons out in the country, right? So they would give you a loan if you had a workforce, a non-paying workforce, you know. So my granddaddy accumulated 800 acres of land on the other side of Lake Thunderbird. And well, that's a big conglomeration of bomber clot stuff, because families that have land and the deed said, Grandpa said, don't split the land up until the last child is 21. And when he passed, I think the last child was only 10. So they waited and waited and waited. Then he got up to 60, and they hadn't split it up. So he passed about 66, he died. Okay, still wasn't split up. It came to 1980, it still hadn't been split up. And so then the anxiety over who gets what, when we gonna do this, created this Hatfield-McCoy kind of tension. So everybody became against each other. And so it never got split up. The courts ended up kind of taking it and paying out some kind of value to the existing heirs. My dad was still alive when they did that. So they gave him, I don't know, a few $1,000s or something for it, but that's as far as it got. So I'm real lucky. I live on 5 acres, but it didn't have nothing to do with the 800. I could have had at least 20, 25 on the other side of the lake, but it didn't work out that way. But that's cool. I came here with nothing, so it wasn't no big deal. We've been poor all my life. We've been poor. So my father, he moved from the country to the city, Oklahoma City. When he got to Oklahoma City, his job was, he's a butler, just in the service industry, as most black folks was back then. You was in cooking, or you was a butler, or you was a driver, or you did something for the rich man on the other side of town, mostly in Nichols Hills. Okay, so when I was born on Deep Deuce on 2nd Street, and we moved to 3rd Street, and then eventually moved to 4th Street, 4th and Bonshill or something like that. And so we were always poor. I mean, I can remember going to get commodity cheese and government butter. Once every 2 weeks, they give you a little token thing, and you could go to the grocery store and get this free cheese, free butter, and milk, and commodities that the government had designated that, well, we can't get rid of this fast enough, so we're going to look like we're helping people by giving it away, which was good for us. But anyway, so it was during this time that the lady named Clara Luper, they had talked about building the Air Force base called Tinker. So when Tinker came in, they wasn't giving no jobs to black people. Black folks wasn't getting no job. So Clara went to the generals of the Air Force base, and she took a little committee with her, and she complained about, why aren't y'all giving my people no jobs, the African Americans no jobs at all? I mean, we do can be more than just janitors and cleaning it up, you know. That little pressure got my dad hired at Tinker as a forklift driver. They trained him to drive a forklift, and that got me out of the ghetto. We call it the ghetto. So we moved from 4th Street or at that time we was on 5th Street. We moved from 5th Street to 19th Street. First black family to move that far up because he had a job now, a job that was paying. You know, everybody else was still butling, and they began to hire other black folks too. But he got this job, and that sprang me out into a different area in 19th Street. And I had a time with the neighbors, and then they came up with white flight, where all the white people began to say, well, our property value is coming down now because we got a black family in the neighborhood. We better start looking for somewhere else to go. So they all started moving over to North Highland area, okay? And they started building new homes over there for the white folks. For the white folks that wasn't, they were kind of middle to low class to poor, you know, poor to low middle, not really upper middle, but so they all moved there. So the black people began to get jobs down in the Deep Deuce area, and they began to move up. And so pretty soon there was another family in my neighborhood on my same block. And pretty soon, after about 4, 5, 6 years, it was all black in the neighborhood. So when we moved to the different neighborhood, I had to go to a different school. I was out of the zone of the black school, so plus they had passed laws by then of busing. The busing laws came into effect. But we had to walk to a school called Webster Junior High School. And it was going to this school, it kind of was a lot different. If you've been going to an all black school all your life, and then all of a sudden you in a school with white folks, things are a little bit different for you. And so you have to learn how to assimilate. And so you kind of give up your culture, and you have to assimilate the culture that they putting you in. I can remember when we went to this school, we all talk like Jamaicans. This here, that, there, ma. This here, that, there. And they said, you can't say this. The word is this. Pronounce it like this. It's not that. It's that. Okay? So they changed our whole way of thinking and seeing things. So we had to kind of be like them. But see, there's a philosophy is that if you're trying to be like somebody, you're always gonna be second class. Okay? If you be like you first. And if he tries to be like you, he's always gonna be second. So we can never get out of being a second class citizen if they teaching you the same thing they're learning, and they want you to be like them. And so we never got any African class. I never learned anything about my culture at that school. So for 3 years at the junior high, we never learned anything about ourselves. They mentioned Harriet Tubman every now and then, but we still didn't know the real dynamic of how we came to be here. How it was that the slavery train brought us here from Africa. We couldn't put that together because it wasn't in writing, at least in the books we were reading. Then I got to Douglas, and Douglas they had the school books that they used on the northwest side of town. They bring them into Douglas, so we still assimilating. You're still trying to learn a different culture than who you really are. But there was a Mr. Harris was one of the teachers, and he was an American history teacher. And he did teach us some things about black culture. I remember learning about Nat Turner. And the history book says Nat Turner was a rebel. He was vicious, half crazy. They tried to storm the city and kill up a whole bunch of people. He was out of his mind. But Mr. Harris tried to tell us that Nat Turner was trying to get his freedom, that the Lord had told him to make a move. It was time to make a move. And until that point, there hadn't been any aggression from black people, except little tiny things that black people had done to say, I reject this system. I totally reject this, until Nat Turner. And then after Nat Turner, then Mark Vesey came along, and another riot came along, and then things started happening. And the progress went all the way down to Marcus Garvey. Marcus Garvey was from Jamaica. See, I got this connection with Jamaicans because I know that half my family came to Jamaica first. And Jamaica was the place that they separated us. So if you came with your mother and your daddy and 3 sisters and a couple of brothers, they had to separate you from your tribe and put you with another tribe and then bring you to America. Okay? And some of them was left in Jamaica, because if you go to Jamaica, you're going to see people you went to school with that look just like the people you went to school with in Jamaica. And the Jamaicans going to say, "Oh, welcome home, brother. I know someone look just like you, man. Come with me, I'll show you him." And it's going to be the brother that look just like you. Y'all might be twins. So this Jamaican bond is with me so deep, I can't shake it. It's like I know that my heritage goes through Jamaica, but the Jamaicans were Ashantis mostly, Ashanti people from Africa. Then I went to OU, but I wasn't prepared mentally for a higher education from Oklahoma University. I fell asleep in most of the classes. We played. It wasn't but 15 or 20 black people even going to OU then. Mostly all the brothers was running track and playing football. So my mentality wasn't ready for that type of education. Now, a lot of people could handle it, but me, I couldn't handle it. So I dropped out and got drafted. So I did my 2 years in Uncle Sam, and this was the worst. It was the worst time of my life because it was so prejudiced in the United States. The Army was so prejudiced that I got PTSD just from being in the Army, and I didn't go to Vietnam, but just being around racist white people was terrible. So I managed to get through that all right. So I get out of the Army, and so I have what's called a GI Bill now. So that means I can pick out a school and they're gonna pay for my education to a certain extent. I might have to pay for my books, but they'll pay my tuition. So I didn't know what I was gonna take. So I had moved, after I got out of service, moved to San Francisco. And so when I'm in San Francisco, I had a white friend, and my white friend said, we was in a conversation once, and they said, "You know what we saved black people. We if it hadn't been for us, y'all would still be jungle bunnies in Africa, because we saved y'all. I mean, what have y'all done? And I could not answer that question. Even though I had been in the sit-ins in Oklahoma City, marching with Miss Looper. And that takes us back to when I met Calvin Looper. And I didn't know his mom was Clara Looper, and the sit-ins was just starting. That was 1958. We had the first major sit-in. Clara Looper organized march with a bunch of youth. I was one of them. We went downtown, formed a line around Cass Drug Store until finally we decided to go in. First we just protested with picket signs. Then we decided to go in. We went in, and Miss Looper's strategy was the counter was always full. They had the biggest lunch counter I've ever seen. They don't even make lunch counters that long no more. I mean, they had like 50 seats on the lunch counter. So we go there, but they also had shopping where you could buy clothes on the aisle over. You could buy clothes. So they would let you go in and shop for clothes, but they wouldn't let you sit in at the lunch counter. So Miss Looper would say, pretend you're shopping, but always looking at the lunch counter. And when somebody gets up from the lunch counter, you go over there and sit down. And they're going to tell you they're not going to feed you. That's what we started doing, one at a time. We go over to the lunch counter. And I remember my turn came. I was nervous. I said, I don't know if I can do this, but I had a sweater. It was still on the hanger, and I saw the white guy get up, and I put it back, and I rushed on over there, and I sat down. They said, yes. I said, she says, don't you know we don't serve coloreds? I said, well, I'm gonna sit here. Ms. Looper told us, I'm gonna sit here till I get served. I want a hamburger and a Coke. I'm gonna sit here till I get served. So eventually, everybody, they finish their meal, their lunch, and get up from the counter, and then another one of our sit-ins would come and sit. So pretty soon we occupied the whole lunch counter. And then that's when they called the police. The police would come in and say, well, I can't do nothing. They're not really breaking the law. The law ain't saying they can't sit there. The law is you don't have to serve them. Okay? So it was a stalemate. And so, as I remember it, after 2 days, Cat said, y'all breaking the bank on us. We gotta let y'all have this. So we're gonna start serving. And as a matter of fact, they had 52 lunch counters around the country start serving African Americans after that. So that was a devastating blow to the establishment. So I went through several years of sitting in and protesting and asking for my rights, but didn't realize what the scope of it was. I still didn't have no knowledge of my past, of how far back I could go. Go to San Francisco. I'm talking with my white friend. He tells me this, and I say, you know what? They just starting a session on African American Studies at the University of San Francisco. I think I'm gonna try that. So I took my GI Bill and I took all black classes, and I learned too much stuff about me. We learned everything from. It was the most enlightening thing that I've ever done in my life, because this it took you to Egypt, and so once you know the history of the Egyptians and how even how Egypt was started from the Ethiopians and the Nubians following the Nile River. That's how Egypt got started. The people started camping out on the crescent valley of the Nile and started settling there, and they became the most powerful place in the world. Okay, and if you look back at the faces of these Egyptians, they are black folks. So once you know that, Elizabeth Taylor, who played Cleopatra, that we all grew up thinking that the Egyptians were these bad white people. But even before Elizabeth Taylor playing Cleopatra, even before that dynasty, if you go all the way back to the first dynasties, they was all black folks. And if you see their pictures, they didn't have pictures, they carved statues of themselves, had statues carved of them. And they got the big broad noses, and that's when you become proud of yourself. Big lips, the hair on their face, and they braided their beards up, and you see these pictures, and then you start reading about the first scientists, Akhenaten, this Egyptian who performed operations before mankind. The white people were still in caves, and this they were doing all kinds of stuff, and so the history says that the Greeks and the Romans all came to Egypt to study, and they took back this information and said that they discovered all of this stuff. And so, but that wasn't true, because the history books, after you get to college and you can take you some African American courses, it's gonna tell you all about who and what and why and how I came to be here. Okay? So once you know that, then can't nobody really, you don't have to be insulted. Can't nobody insult me by their ignorance of black people, because I know my path of how I got here, the conditions that brought me here. And so they would have it that the Bible even says that we got cursed through, I forget who it was now. We were cursed through Noah. Somebody, his son looked at him nakedly or something, saw him naked and just said, "You'll be cursed to be black for generations and generations," or something like that. But and then that's another thing, because then you find out that the Bible of the King James Version Bible, it was written before King James got his hands on it and changed it. It was called the Book of the Dead. And then there were manuscripts by other folks who contributed to the Old Testament of the Bible. And that's, and me being brought up as a Christian. I went to the Baptist church, the Methodist church all my life as a kid. Even the pictures of the white Jesus with the blonde hair and blue eyes was in our church on the walls. And we got down on our knees to worship this Jesus. And so, but all the time you feeling that something's not right about this. Could Jesus have been a black person? But then they bring it in, well, in Mexico, Jesus is Mexican. And in Japanese, he's Japanese. In China, he's a Chinese Jesus. And so black folks, we ain't never had a black Jesus. We've talked about it, but then all of a sudden you have what's called the Black Madonna, which if you go to any of the white countries, Denmark, Sweden, Amsterdam, Holland, they all have a Black Madonna, and the Madonna was Jesus's mama. But when you get to America, Jesus' mama was a white lady. So, but now, if you kind of get your history together and you kind of know the truth, I don't have to preach it to nobody. I'll let you be ignorant if that's how you want to be. I'm not going to try to correct you, because you can't really correct a person who is, he has been immersed in this, and you can't change his mind by me telling him I've seen something different. He'll never believe me. Anyway, so I went to San Francisco and start learning this culture about me. Everything began to make a little sense. While I'm in San Francisco, I started learning the knowledge of a drum. And I noticed that in our culture, if you go way back to the jungle, in the small communities, the drum was a very important instrument. Not only was it musical, but it was also a communication tool, a language tool. Some reason, when the boat landed in America, you could get the death penalty for playing a drum. Because Africans knew that they could communicate, sending signals, sending words, sending culture. And the master could not figure that out. But when he did figure it out, he knew he was in trouble, so he decided no drums. Just like he decided, don't teach him how to read. So the drums kind of, when I first got interested in playing the drums, it was like it hit my heart, and I knew that somewhere in my DNA, somebody played a drum or was around drums, because I picked it up too fast. And so I began to play the drum musically until I figured out I could teach young kids a drumming method, a drumming style. Because a lot of kids are left out in music because they can't play a violin. They can't play the recorder. They can't play a saxophone or a guitar, but the majority of them can play a drum. And when you put a drum in a kid's hand and he learns to be a part of that rhythm that's in the group, he is inspired, and it raises what they call his self-esteem, because he can play a little bit. The drum called out to me. I left San Francisco and came back to Oklahoma, in 1985, I was visiting a friend who had a young daughter, and his daughter was in I think it was probably the 3rd grade, and she asked me to come and play at her class to show her schoolmates what I did on the streets of San Francisco. So I took a drum and went into the school, to her classroom of about 25, 30 kids, and I gave a drum demonstration. Well, the principal saw me. He walked up and saw me. He said, hey, after I was done, he said, you need to be an artist in resident. And I said, well, what's that? He said, well, that is a professional musician who goes around and teaches, or at least demonstrates his knowledge, his profession to young people to inspire them. They might not want to play a drum, but they might want to play something after I'm finished talking with them. So I went down to the art council to make an application. I took a drum with me that day, a little small drum, and I told the guy, he handed me a stack of papers like this to fill out. I said, oh no, I just want to get into schools and show kids how to play. He said, give me a demonstration of what you can do. So I just kind of played a little bit of. Funga la fia, ashe, ashe. 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 Ashe, ashe. Ashe, ashe. Ashe, ashe. Ashe, ashe. By the time I was done, he said, you don't have to fill out these papers. He said, I'm going to send you a schedule of where you need to go and where you're going to be. And we want you in the art council because there's nobody else doing this. And I'm thinking it surely would be a great thing for kids for you to inspire kids. So I began going from, I remember first school I went to was in Mustang, Oklahoma. And so in Mustang, you gotta watch what you say in Mustang because it is the buckle of the Bible Belt. Mustang is. So I messed around and said something like, I'm a Virgo, and does anybody else know what their sign is or something like that? Oh, the teacher came up and said, oh no, you can't say anything about no astrology. That's like, we don't believe in nothing like that. I said, oh, I'm sorry, I was just trying to break the ice with the kids, you know, that's okay. So I kept saying things that, and she would always come up and say, I can't say. So it was like, I said, well, it'd be easy if you give me a list of the things I can't say, then I won't say them. But I'm just, you know, at that point I had been traveling with bands and playing around the United States. So my trying to be nice language wasn't there yet, but I developed it. I learned a little bit from going to Mustang. It was another thing you can't say. I said, well, y'all need to go home and meditate on this. Oh, you can't say meditate. I said, well, if you can't, what's wrong with saying meditate? I don't get it. Meditation is just stopping your mind slowing it down and try to make it go blank for a few seconds. Take a few 10 deep breaths, and you meditating, okay? And then if you have a subject that you can think about, then you're meditating. And I talk to kids. I say, look, all you got to do, think of a blood cell. Place the blood cell in your feet. Close your eyes, and then you're going to watch this blood cell come all the way up your body from your feet. You follow it from your feet to your ankles, all the way up your calves to your kneecap. You watching it now. And I told them to follow it all the way up, and we was all quiet and take 10 deep breaths now. And the cell is going to go into your head, and when it gets into your brain, a light is going to beam down in your brain. And that means you are fully open to the universe, and just wait on whatever comes to that light will be information for you. Oh no, you can't do that, sir. I'm sorry. So the experience of the Art Council was really good for me because I got a chance to travel all over Oklahoma. I went to Podunk, Oklahoma, to Miami, Oklahoma, all the way to Doonesboro, to Boley, Oklahoma. I went everywhere. They were astonished to see me. I was like, that's when the kids was like, what the? Remember when kids started saying, what the? And they wouldn't finish it, but back in the old days, it was saying if you said that. But anyway, and I dressed in my African garb, and I was straight out of Africa. But I could also talk like this right here if I wanted to, because I'm really from Oklahoma. And then their eyes would get big. I can remember one day my cell phone rang, and I reached in my pocket, and they could not believe me being black in an African outfit that I even owned a cell phone. It was incredible. So I went representing black folks all through Oklahoma, because some places I went, they had no black friends. It might have been one or two black people at the school, but it was just amazing for me. It was a highlight of my life to be able to do that. I got so powerful that the Art Council, they stopped me. They said, oh no, he's getting too big. He's getting too big. So the Art Council review, you had to review every 2 years. So I went up for a review, and I was working so much I had paychecks that I couldn't even cash, that it was so fast. I was getting a paycheck and I wasn't cashing in. And one day I looked up, I had a stack of checks like this that I had to cash. So I was doing so well that prejudice and racism came out, and the Art Council blocked me from. They told me I wasn't good enough to be on the Art Council, as a matter of fact, and so they didn't renew my certificate to be an artist in residence. But I was so popular, people called me anyway. And so I kept on working. I even worked more without being in the Art Council, because my reputation was really large then. Then I started working for museums is who got the money now. For all y'all listening and you want to be an artist in residence, the museums are the ones now that have the bank accounts. If you can get a museum job, you'll really get paid. So I started working as an artist in residence, and I learned all this from that taking those black classes, because the drums like just start coming to me. Can we take a break now? Cool. From Senegal, just from a guy carved some wood and carved it in tune. I got all kind of instruments. In order for you to be here now, you had to be in the beginning. You know, somebody carried a seed for you to be here. And that seed was never ending. It didn't get tossed over the boat, over the deck of the boat. You didn't die you made it this far. That seed, you made it this far. So it has a beginning. I'll never forget the color scheme of things where it says you can't get black out of white, but you can get white out of black. They used to talk about it in my class all the time. That was one of the keys to understanding life, where he didn't put that thing on you. He wanted you to believe that he was the first, the Neanderthal man was the first person, that we all came from him. And my drums, I still got a few left. I used to take 30 drums of this size to a school. And they give me a classroom, and they would bring them all up and set them down, and then I'd go to work. My greatest thing that I learned was dealing with little kids, because they'd always say little kids don't have no patience. After about 10 minutes, they get bored and they're not gonna listen to you. So I went into a school, I think it was in Ardmore, or it could have been Ada, where it was 300 preschool kids, and they would bring me each class to me. And they coming in yelling and hollering, and so I had to come up with some kind of idea to keep the attention for 30 minutes. So I ended up could go 45 minutes, an hour without them budging, because I'm a storyteller. And so I started learning and listening to folk tales, African folk tales, about animals, different animals. It's never people folk tales. It's always this experience of the animal and a person. I started telling stories because there's always a story with the drum I was playing. Before I introduce you to playing the drum, I tell you why they played this drum in an African context, so that you would understand that this was a ceremonial drum, or it was a come to dinner drum, or the king is coming drum, and then I tell you a story about it. There was a drum that that a kid played once who was paraplegic. He couldn't move nothing but his arms, and he couldn't hardly walk, or he could barely talk. And the drum master taught him how to play a drum. And so once all the drummers had gone from the village on a to go hunting with the men, because they take the drums with them when they would go hunting, so that they would play some drums and scare the animals over to where they were so they could capture the animals. At the time that the hunters left, another village came to attack their village, and the boy who had learned how to play the drum played a rhythm that sounded, and this rhythm went all the way to where they were hunting, and the hunters heard this rhythm that the boy was playing, and he was playing a rhythm that we're being attacked rhythm. And everybody came back and they saved the village in time. They came back just in time to save their village. And so they gave the boy credit for saving his village. And if he hadn't been able to play that drum, he never would have gotten the glory. He got this glory, this sense of being a part of the village. And so they lifted him up on their arms and walked him around and shouted his name. Manumbe, 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 Manumbe. And just this feeling of being a part of the village was so overwhelming for everybody who heard this story anyway, that anybody who had any kind of slight handicap in that group of kids, they were ready to play the drum. It was amazing. So I became a storyteller before you could get a degree in telling stories. Now you have to go to school, and you can go to school and get a master's degree in telling stories. I used to go and watch storytellers and see what I could learn from. They used to have a storytelling event in downtown Oklahoma City called Winter Tales. And I go down there and listen to storytellers. They had the guy on the plains, the cowboy storytellers, and the New York guy would come and tell stories, but they never have too many African folk tale stories. That's why I learned that Bugs Bunny was really Anansi the spider in Africa. They tell Anansi stories, but when you break it down, you can see where Anansi stories is Bugs Bunny, because couldn't nobody get the best of Bugs Bunny, and nobody ever got the best of Anansi the spider. So I started telling Anansi the spider stories, and I could hold your attention for a long time telling these stories, and they became like magical things. Everybody wanted the storyteller then. Powerful thing, especially when you put drums and stories together. So a good occupation for somebody is the rebirth of storytelling, because nowadays they don't tell stories anymore, hardly. I grew up where somebody came into the room when I was 3 or 4, and they told me a story to put me to sleep. Usually it was Bear Rabbit stories that my aunt would come and tell. He would tell Bear Rabbit. My dad told stories sometimes, but they were all kind of Bear Rabbit tales, Uncle Remus tales, and they were fascinating. You go to sleep thinking about Tar Baby and how how they tarred and feathered one of those rabbits. I forgot who it was. But anyway, these stories stick to your head, and so you always remember them. Storytelling is a good profession. Like I say, now you can I know you can get a master's. I don't know if you can get a doctor's degree in storytelling, but I noticed that Native Americans are heavy on storytelling too. I used to give stories where I was giving the African stories, and then the Native American would give his stories too. I never did hear the Chinese stories, Japanese stories, or any other cultural stories. I'm sure they have stories too. I'm sure everybody's got stories. But what I'm saying is, I used to ask kids, were they getting stories when they were growing up? No, they wasn't getting them no more. So that became a dying art. And so I guess they revived it by making it a college course, so that you take these classes and they teach you how to develop your style of storytelling. So let me tell you a story. Once upon a time, a long, long time ago, long before the ancestors had come, in a little village of just animals, the animals began to notice that the water was not so much of it. It was drying up. The water hole had shrunk down to just a little bubble in the ground, and they began to fight over the water. It was during the time that they were getting ready the king had gotten so old that they needed a new king, because the king was so old he couldn't decide what to do about the water. So he said, we need a new king. Who's going to be the new king? So the king said, here's my spear. He took his spear and he said, whoever can throw the spear in the air and count to 20 before it hits the ground will become the king. So the first one up was the gorilla. And he beat on his chest like this. Give me that spear. And he took the spear in his hands and he said, and he heaved that spear as hard as he could. And the spear went up, and he started counting. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The spear went all the way up to the clouds. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. It was on its way down. 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. And the spear hit the ground on 19. The next one up was the elephant. And the elephant put the spear in his trunk. And he reared back and he threw that spear as hard as he could. 1, 2, 3. It reached the cloud. Busted through the cloud. 4, 5, 6, 7. It reached the moon. 8. It passed by the moon on 9. 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. At 15, it made it to Mars. 16, it turned and started coming back down. But what goes up comes down faster. 16, 17, it passed the moon. 18, 19, it busted to the clouds. He got ready to say, form his lips to say 20, and the spear hit the ground before he could say 20. He was really upset. I threw the spear to Mars and couldn't count to 20. The next one up was the lion. And the lion said, hand me that spear. And just before they handed it to the lion, a little deer came out. And the little deer said, it's all right if I go before the lion because I got something to do and I ain't gonna be able to be in the competition if I don't go now. And the lion said, yeah, let him go now because I know he can't do nothing. They laid the spear on the ground. The little deer went up to the spear and he grabbed it, but he couldn't lift it. It was heavy. And he got it all the way up to his shoulder and he put it on his shoulder. And he said, okay, I'm ready. And he chugged it as hard as he could. And the spirit said, and it was on the way down. The deer said, 5, 10, 15, 20. And the spear hit the ground. Everybody said, 5, 10, 15, 20, he's cheating. You can't do that. And the little deer said, well, he didn't say we had to count by ones. I counted by 5s. The king came up and put the crown on the little deer's head, and the deer became king. Now, a lot of people don't know that the deer became king, was once the king of all the animals. That's why he's got a big crown of thorns on his head, of horns on his head, because he was once the king. Now, there's another story that goes that the lion got mad, and he went up to the village and told man that the deer had cheated. And he said he'd give a good pittance, a good amount of money to bring in the deer's head to kill the king. So man went out hunting for the deer. They thought they saw him. And they drug in that deer, but it wasn't the right one. And they began to kill the deer all over. Finally, they figured out they could not find the king of the deer. And to this day, man is still hunting for the king of the deer, the king of all the animals. The lion, because the king never shows up, the lion becomes the king. And that's why we all think the lion is the king of the jungle. But he ain't. The deer is still king. And that's my story and I'm sticking to it.